Promising a return to law and order, Richard Nixon defeats Hubert Humphrey in the 1968 presidential election. On March 20th, a federal grand jury announces the indictment of the men who will come to be known as the Chicago Eight.
Nixon decided to prosecute us. It's a federal crime, and it's a federal law, and the Justice Department is doing it, and Nixon made that decision. So we point the finger directly at Nixon, and we thank him, and we're ready for the fight, and we're going to beat him.
The defendants, Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, John Freunds, Dave Dellinger, Lee Weiner, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, and Bobby Seale, are each charged with the intent to organize, promote, and encourage riots. They are also charged collectively with conspiracy to commit these offenses.
They indicted as a conspiracy to violate the law. So technically, what the charges really said is that the group of 8 people agreed, and the agreement was the crime.
These were disparate groups. You had the Yippies, who were probably the most unorganized group of folks you'd ever want to meet, with Abby and Jerry Rubin. Then you had the more traditionalist, if you will, mobilization to end the war in Vietnam, characterized by Dave Dellinger and Rennie Davis. And you had Bobby Seale.
Seale was the chairman of the Black Panther Party. His indictment for conspiracy was the most controversial, since the Black Panthers had no organizational role during the Convention Week demonstrations.
My inclusion is not so much that I don't think that I went and spoke there, because I was not even scheduled to go. My inclusion was to try to destroy and neutralize the Black Panther Party.
Now these 3 groups, they were really doing different things and had completely different agendas. And the government forced them together in this conspiracy case.
The law under which the Chicago Eight are indicted is the anti-riot provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1968.
It was passed after the tragic death of Martin Luther King. President Johnson put before the Senate a new Civil Rights Act, and he wanted it passed immediately as a tribute to King. The Senate, realizing that Johnson wanted the law quickly, then attached an amendment to the Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act of 1968 is probably one of the most restrictive provisions against the freedoms of the First Amendment ever enacted by the Senate.
This was the first time that the federal government decided to attempt to regulate or criminalize, this kind of conduct and speech. Previously, if there was a riot going on in LA, that's for the local authorities to handle.
There were all sorts of things going on down south. Riots in the streets. And there were organizers going around trying to take advantage of those disturbances. And the Congress simply passed the bill.
Now you're going to look at my speech and decide whether or not my speech is illegal. I suggest that's a very slippery slope.
America, the pig empire, in its last throes, has decided that it was going to devour its children.
September 1969, the opening day of the Chicago conspiracy trial. Abby Hoffman addresses a crowd of supporters in Grant Park.
We ain't gonna participate in America's Children for Breakfast program. We're gonna resist. We're gonna make them choke on the f***ing meal.
I and the other defendants had agreed that we were going to put the government on trial.
We saw the courtroom as an arena for public opinion.
The trial commences in a 23rd floor courtroom in Chicago's Federal Building.
It clearly had all of the ingredients of a totally repressive condition. The courtroom was frequently lined with marshals. People were assaulted, were punched, dragged out of the courtroom.
I mainly felt fear all the way through the trial. You just realized it was a dangerous place to be.
Judge Julius J. Hoffman will preside over the trial.
He had been allegedly told all these horrible stories by the FBI about what these men were going to do, and he said from day one, I'm going to show them who's boss.
The defendants wanted to call him Mr. Magoo, and he did have some resemblance to the cartoon character Mr. Magoo, but Julius Hoffman was no Mr. Magoo.
He did things in front of the jurors that were outrageous. You don't criticize defense lawyers while they're making examinations. At one point he said, Mr. Counselor, I'm not gonna go to kindergarten here with you. I mean, maybe you should learn how to be a lawyer. These kinds of things.
The deep-seated animosity between Judge Hoffman and an unruly group of defendants will quickly escalate. In desperation, the judge will do something unheard of in an American court of law. When Crime Stories continues.